So each day when I do my check-in calls with everybody, again, the dial on the code switch has to tweak a little bit. And then in the same day, I have to talk to funders in Washington, D.C. and funders in New York. Switch the dial again. All of a sudden, we're American now, and we're doing biz dev. And then all of a sudden, we're interviewing a guest from Pakistan. Oh, we've got to switch the dial again. And so that, to me, is the thrill and the joy of being able to do a job like this.
A large portion of the people that come and watch our reviews or read our reviews are wondering, oh, this bounce they talk about, or it's so responsive. They're wondering, is that true? That sort of thing may scare some brands. They're like, well, we don't want people to know that. But alongside that, we're answering a lot of questions that help them avoid returns, help them avoid unhappy customers.
Welcome to Creative Independence,
a podcast by Memberful. I'm Jen Matichuk.
And I'm Cy Wilmore. In this podcast, we speak to successful and passionate entrepreneurs who have won big in the creator economy. Being reliable and trustworthy beats being trendy. In order to build a long-term community, you have to do more than just follow trends. Today, we're joined by Eric Olander, co-founder and editor-in-chief of China Global South, an independent, non-partisan media initiative dedicated to exploring every facet of China's engagement in Africa and throughout the developing world. Hi, Eric. How are you doing today? You well?
I'm doing well. Simon, Jen, thanks for letting me join you on the show today.
Eric started his job in journalism, working for some of the biggest news outlets in the world. While a journalist, he became interested in China, and he created the China Global South project. Chinese engagement in Africa was an underreported topic, especially in the US, and he had the access and the perspective to tackle it.
Well, it started way back in 2005, 2006, when I first started going to the Congo. Now, my background is as a journalist in China for AP, CNN, BBC, the alphabet soup of international news agencies. I've kind of done them over the years. And so, but my background's all in China and Asia. And I started going to the Congo, where my brother was living back then, just to visit him for Thanksgiving and every year. So in 2005, I went for the first time, and there were no Chinese in the Congo, and I didn't really expect to see any. Obviously, that's not a place where one would expect to see a lot of Chinese people. And there was one Chinese restaurant, though, in the capital, Kinshasa, which really goes to prove that there is a Chinese restaurant in literally every city in the world. So then in 2006, I went back and there were 2 Chinese restaurants. And I thought, that's interesting. But by 7, 8, and 9, it just went boom. I mean, there were Chinese people everywhere. There was construction going on. There were stores it just out of nowhere, something was happening. And it's one of these things, it's a little bit like, I lived through both of the dot-com booms in the San Francisco Bay Area. And in the first dot-com boom, you had this idea, you knew something big was happening. There was all this money, all these people, but you couldn't figure out what it was in the moment. And I had that same feeling in Kinshasa, where you saw change happening right in front of your eyes. The problem was for me, and when I eventually moved to Kinshasa to run my brother's company in 2010, I started looking at a lot of the media coverage, and it is, as it is today, China is a very polarizing issue. China is an issue where there's very little middle ground on it. And so reading the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Financial Times, the Guardian, the narrative about the Chinese in Africa was all, China's colonizing Africa and is taking over. It was very threatening, very menacing, and it was very negative coverage. Conversely, when you look at the Chinese press, it's entirely the opposite. It's, win-win, everything's great, the Chinese are coming to help, and there was no nuance in it. And so I talked to my employees and I said, what do you guys think of the Chinese? And they gave me these really complex, textured, nuanced answers. We like this, but we don't like that. And I said, that's the story right there. It's the complexity of it all. It is the good and the bad sit side by side one another. Now, this is heretical in today's world because, you're either a CNN or MSNBC watcher or you're a Fox News watcher. You're not in that middle space. But I started blogging, and back in 2010, what was going on in 2010? Blogger, remember that? And so I started blogging and tweeting a little bit, and there was, it was all this thing, and podcasting had just started as well. And I started doing it by celebrating that complexity. I don't have an agenda. I don't really live or die or care whether the Chinese succeed or fail anywhere in the world, whether the U.S. succeeds or fail in the world. That's not my point. I come from a very journalistic background. My job is to provide you, the listener, the reader, the viewer, with information the best way that I see it, and then I let it up to you to decide what you do with it. And so this started as a passion project, and for 10 years it went that way, and we built up a very large audience, more than 1.5 million social followers, one of the most popular China-themed podcasts, popular newsletter, all these things that we were kind of doing just as a side hustle. No money, just more for the pleasure of doing it.
Because Eric pushed into this niche realm, he had to fight for views and readers. But when the right people found his content, they stuck around because of his relentless pursuit of an ultra-specific topic that no one else was covering in the way that he was. He hasn't gone viral with his content, but he has amassed a loyal readership by being reliable.
Substack totally changed the game, okay? Because prior to Substack, newsletters were still kind of a rare thing, okay? And it was much easier to get into the market. Now, again, I have no axe to grind against Substack. I think what they do is fantastic. But what happened is that had I started 1 or 2 years earlier, I would have been much more successful than when I did start, which is right at the time when Substack came out, because newsletters went from being a premium product where you could actually sell something because people got maybe 10, 20 a day into their inbox, if that much, maybe 5, to 50. Because everybody had a newsletter, and the pandemic came along and everybody went home and just said, I'm going to make $5 a month selling subscriptions, for each subscriber. And it just shot up. And then the value of the newsletter went down very quickly in terms of what people paid. So we originally thought we were selling a newsletter. And then we quickly realized we're not selling a newsletter. We're selling a news service. So the New York Times doesn't sell newsletters. The New York Times sells a subscription that you get podcasts, Wordle, you get newsletters, you get all the different, and you get the news, you get the whole experience. And that's what we pivoted to. But it was a hard pivot because we didn't see anywhere near the traction that I heard from either the kind of the stories coming out of Substack of people converting, 5, 10%. I then did my calculations thinking if I can convert 1% of my social following, hallelujah, I'm made. That's it. I don't have to, I don't have to worry about this thing. I'll be honest with you. I didn't convert 1%. It's a hard thing. I have to fight for every single subscriber. And I think it was a big disservice of the membership community. And this is one of the things I like about Memberful is that they don't sugarcoat it. And this is one of the reasons I like the service you guys offer. But other services, are really hyping up that this is a great way. You can make a lot of money. It's easy if you're passionate. The conversion rates are high, and it masks how truly difficult it is. And again, if you're passionate as we are about it, I get up every single day and I start work at 6, and here it's 8:30 and I'm still going because I love it. But you gotta have that drive. If you don't have that drive, this is a tough way to make a living. The business we thought we were getting into is not the business that we're in. And this is one of the other things I always talk about with creators is that where you start and where you end up are two totally different places. So we thought we were going to be a subscription first business with foundations and with speaking fees and with ancillary revenue as the secondary. It turns out that we've turned into a foundation first business with subscriptions as the ancillary revenue. And it's going to take time. Now, our subscriptions are going up. They're just going up much slower. And then the other part is that churn kills you. And so you have to find ways to offset the churn. So again, we have this idea that, it's just going to steadily keep going up and up and up. And all of a sudden, it's so demoralizing that 1 week you gain 10 subscribers and you're like, yes, this is going to work. And then you lose 9 out of churn. You're just like, that just goes to your core. And it's funny, every subscriber that I lose, I almost take it personally, because I put my heart and soul into this thing. Now, you talk to people about, why did you unsubscribe? How come you hurt me like this? How could you do this to me? And they're like, my credit card expired and I forgot to renew. Oh, and you're like, okay. Yeah, that's okay. Or like, I'm not taking a class in that anymore. I don't need it for my job anymore. And you're like, yeah, that's a legit reason too. Okay. So people have very legitimate reasons for why they stop subscribing. But boy, when on that Memberful dashboard, when you see like the red, you're just like, oh. So that's a hard thing. But again, you need a strong stomach for this. And again, this isn't meant to discourage anybody from doing it. It's the best job I've ever had. But I think it's important to be honest about what it takes to succeed if this is your full-time thing. If this is a part-time hustle and you've got a day job, and I know a lot of people who do that, where they charge $5 a month, they write a weekly newsletter, and it doesn't matter if they're making, 100 subscribers a month or 10,000 a month, they'll do the same thing because they're not depending on it. But for those of us who depend on it, each subscriber that you lose and each subscriber that you gain is a personal victory or loss.
While much of America is focused on trending topics and viral content, Eric is stuck with the topics he believes need to be shared and the voices he believes need to share them. Even his reporting finds that most countries outside of America follow long-term trends versus short-term trends.
China is the puzzle that can never be solved. And it's a riddle. And it's one of these places that people either love or hate right away. And again, I'm not talking politics. I'm not talking Communist Party. I'm talking about the country, the people, the place, the culture. And it is just, and again, that's why you have this massive community in the United States and in Europe and around the world of what we call China watchers. And all of us have the same thing. Even people who hate the Chinese government and hate the Communist Party, they are still fascinated by China. And that stretches across the spectrum. And so I'm one of those people who's just, I got bit early and I've never looked back. And so the key difference between the way the Chinese see the world and certainly the way that Americans see the world and increasingly the way that Europeans do is on the question of time. We are a notoriously impatient people. We work on quarters. We work even on less than quarters. You see this right now in the economic turmoil that we're facing in the United States, that there's massive layoffs that are starting to happen in the tech sector. They've had a couple bad quarters. That's it. Boom, we start shedding people. Okay, that's the way we work. We want to see results quick. We want to move fast. Now, that's great because we have this ability to take initiative and to do things. But at the same time, we're very impatient people. The Chinese have a very different sense of time. They see things in years, decades, if
5-year plans. Yeah,
exactly. And then, but also just they'll absorb massive losses for years because they see something coming in year 20. Okay. That is completely an anathema to us. And so this ability and again, it's not uniquely a Chinese thing, by the way. The Japanese, it's a very Asian thing in many respects. Japanese also have a similar sense of time. I remember talking to a Toyota executive and he said, we have a 50-year plan for China. You're like, what? 50-year plan? This is Toyota. And so we don't think like that. So that is, I think, when we look at the fundamental difference between how our two peoples see the world, the perception of time is a very important difference and one that we don't fully understand. The other important thing here is that I don't feel, let me just switch that. I know that Americans and most of the world does not understand what's happening with China. China is a transformative force for the rest of your lives and our lives. They are on their way to becoming the largest economy in the world. They have the largest military in the world, the largest navy. They're the largest auto market, the largest computer market, the largest phone market. You go down the list. And even as we are decoupling and as we're pulling apart, they are going to be a rival that the West has never confronted before, one that is this strong, this technologically advanced, this wealthy, and this resurgent. And we are not spending enough time to understand them. So I take enormous pride out of the fact that our entire team is composed of people from the global South, people who represent a diversity in terms of gender, sexual orientation, geography, all of that, because that to me tells a more complex story. We need to hear the stories from the underrepresented voices. We need to hear the stories from young people. We need to hear the stories from women. We need to hear the stories from people in the impacted countries and regions that we don't get to hear in traditional media. And I'll tell you, when I was at CNBC in Singapore, it was so easy to get the banks as guests on the show. Why? Because the banks literally have a built-in studio where they flip a switch, boom, they're connected right into CNBC. Okay? So they get on all the time. And one of the reasons why you don't see more diverse faces on mainstream channels like CNBC is because it's really hard to cultivate these sources. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, but they're there. I mean, it'll take me 2-3 months sometimes to get a scholar from Kenya to come on my podcast. Well, what's a podcast? I don't know who you are. Well, I said, take a listen. Here's some links. Over the next couple of weeks, I send some other links. I then have a phone call for 25 minutes with him. 2 or 3 weeks go by. I then follow up with another email. And finally, after 6, 7, 8 weeks, they start to feel a little bit more comfortable about the whole thing. And then they come. Okay, we have 2 shows a week that we're doing, but literally the effort it takes to line up these guests can take months. What is interesting is bringing these voices of people who are really very important. Again, the audience for the Hindustan Times is enormous. And what he writes about China is absolutely going to be diametrically different than the New York Times correspondent in Beijing. And so that perspective, I think, is really worthwhile to add to the discourse. And that's what we're hoping to bring.
So, while Eric hasn't produced viral content, he has produced a loyal, consistent community that shares the same values as he does. He did this through reliable and trustworthy reporting on his subject of expertise.
Here's the thing. I love the product that we make. I am so proud of the product that we make. And so I'm holding on to the product. I'm not, a lot of people, again, our subscriptions, I'll be honest with you, aren't anywhere near where I want them to be. We're about 1/3 of where I hoped we would be at this point in our development. Okay. But I'm hoping I'm going to be one of these overnight successes that took 8 years. Okay. And one of the things that I've found over the years of doing this is that our success and my personal success is because I am just stubborn and persistent, and you just keep plowing along. Every single day at 6 a.m. Eastern, 3 a.m. Pacific time, a newsletter drops. Every single Friday, there's a podcast that drops. Every single Tuesday, there's another podcast that drops. There's 15 to 20 tweets that go out. There's daily LinkedIn posts that go out. There's 5 to 7 Facebook posts that go out. We're doing speaking engagements. We're doing all of these things just because, it's like think of it as like the actress or the actor in Los Angeles that's waiting tables and going to auditions, and you just keep going. And we're not where we want to be. We are, thankfully, as a media company, we've always been profitable from the first year. Again, mostly because of foundations and also because of speaking and other ancillary revenue. And as a media company in 2022, that is a damn good accomplishment. Okay. And that's something I'm super proud of, because most media companies can't say that, even small ones like ours with 8-9 people. But we're not where we need to be in terms of our independence and then stability, that I know year to year I'm going to be able to keep the staff. I lose one big grant right now, and I have to lay people off. Okay. I want to have the subscriptions to be that insurance, that blanket that wraps us all up warm at night, that says, even if I lose one of my grants, because my subscriptions are so strong and I've got so much money in the bank, I can hold on to my staff. That's my goal. And I take very seriously now that we have 8 families that depend on us. Okay. So these subscriptions are more than just, get a news service. You're genuinely supporting 8 families who depend on this as a livelihood. And that's, again, another point of pride for me is that we're building this community together. And so my goal in the next year is to keep those subscriptions going up. So one of the things that we're doing with Memberful is, we're constantly retweaking the business plan. And this is another piece of advice that I have for listeners who are just starting into this, is that you will come into what you think is a subscription strategy. I'm going to charge $5 a month or $15, for a year or whatever it is. And you think that's the right way to go. And then all of a sudden you realize it's not working. So we've sat down with the team at Memberful and we've said, here's our problem. And some of your colleagues have come back with some amazing solutions. So we're going to switch from a monthly subscription option to a quarterly subscription option. We're going to make offer our student subscriptions. Now you have to email us to get a student subscription. You can't just get it default because we found that there's quite a few people taking advantage of the discounted student rates and they shouldn't be. And so we're going to be, streamlining the subscription process, streamlining the offer, and you just got to keep reinventing this thing until it works. And then even, by the way, they tell me once it works, you can't sit on it because a year later, well, what you did isn't working anymore because the market's changed and you got to rethink it again. And so you're constantly kind of looking at your strategy and trying to figure out what it is.
Eric Olander has managed to form a loyal readership and community through continually reporting reliable, helpful news, rather than focusing on hit or trending topics. Similarly, Drew Whitcomb aims to provide honest, analytical reviews of sneakers. For him, it's not about the trendiest sneaker on the market, it's about giving honest information to help folks make better sneaker choices for themselves. Today, we're joined by Drew Whitcomb, the COO and co-founder of WearTesters, the world's #1 sneaker review website. Thanks for joining us today, Drew. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, doing really well and great to be here.
Let's get into it, Drew. Maybe just go straight in with quite a kind of overarching question about the why of WearTesters, how it got started, where it came from. I believe it's connected to your love for Michael Jordan and maybe a lack of a decent local shoe store, but perhaps you can elaborate.
I started the original WearTesters website when I was living in Northwest Arkansas, kind of a area that just got built up around Walmart headquarters. I was working for a company that was selling cereal to Walmart at the corporate level. And we didn't have much of anything in the way of shoe stores there. We did have a couple, but they just didn't have any selection when it came to basketball shoes. You had to drive quite a ways to get any basketball shoes. And that's kind of what I chose to do as my exercise back in those days, is all basketball. And so I started buying more and more online, whether it be direct from brands or from retailers. And as I looked to try and get good reviews, I noticed, first of all, that on the websites of the retailers and brands, all those reviews were just very topical, not very in depth. They didn't tell me what I wanted to know. And then there were no websites I could find that were doing any sort of shoe reviews, let alone basketball shoe reviews. And so I just grabbed a WordPress domain, grabbed a domain, then put WordPress on it and just slowly taught myself WordPress and started uploading articles on all the stuff that I bought. And unbeknownst to me, across the country, I was in Arkansas, as I said, across the country in the San Francisco Bay Area, my eventual co-founder, Chris, was starting a YouTube channel, doing the same thing. He had the same problem, though he had better sneaker stores there. His problem was he didn't have enough money to make mistakes when it came to buying shoes. And so he's like, how the heck am I going to know if I should get this Jordan or that LeBron or whatever as my basketball shoe? And so he started doing YouTube videos, really early days of YouTube, 2009, 2010, and kind of with the same thesis as me. We later came across each other, and then I moved to the Bay Area to take a job with PayPal in 2012, and we became fast friends and combined everything at that time. But, the underlying, we had gotten into shoes, both of us, in the late 80s, early 90s, thanks to Michael Jordan popularizing, you'd be squinting at these old style TV sets, trying to figure out what shoe he was wearing. And so we were part of that generation that really found our love of shoes through Michael Jordan and other basketball players like Penny Hardaway and Shaq that started getting signature sneakers.
When Drew started testing and reviewing shoes, he didn't see anyone else doing it like he was. Major shoe brands put big money behind shoe advertisements. And as we all know, advertisements don't usually tell the full story. WearTesters coincides their own shoe reviews with the launch of new sneakers, so people can find the truth among the hype.
The big shoe companies have gotten very good at taking the smallest little technological advance, or half the time they're just sideways steps, lateral steps, and they make them sound like, oh, this is going to make you jump higher, run faster, beat the other team, whatever the case may be. And so a lot of people, rightfully so, are skeptical of some of these as they've, the shoes have arrived at their door when they've fallen for something like this. And then they're like, wait, this is not what I was sold. And so then in the future, they go looking for some sort of review to tell them what about this shoe is legit and what is not. And so I'd say that's a large portion of the people that come and watch our reviews or read our reviews are wondering, oh, this bounce they talk about, or it's so responsive, or it's so plush, or it protects, my knees, or whatever the message is. They're wondering, is that true? But alongside that, we're also answering a lot of questions like that. That sort of thing may scare some brands. They're like, well, we don't want people to know that. But alongside that, we're answering a lot of questions that help them avoid returns, help them avoid unhappy customers, such as, does this fit true to size? When it comes to a shoe, you're used to being a size 10, a size 12, whatever it is, and having someone that has the shoe in hand that knows how a shoe should fit and can then tell you, hey, this fits true to your normal size. Or, you know what, this one runs a little bit short, so order a half size up. Those sort of insights save a lot of hassle, save a lot of annoyance, and ultimately, for the retailer, save money. So we provide the service that way, but also we tell people about the shoe's materials, how the outsole grips on a basketball court, or on a running shoe in the rain, how does it grip? Or in wintry conditions, the sort of things that people want to know because of their specific use cases. Someone playing outdoors isn't going to worry as much about, does the traction grip? They're going to worry about, is the traction durable? Is this going to last me a long time? So if we tell them this traction is really made for indoors, they're going to not buy that shoe, but they're going to buy another one where we say, hey, this traction, will last forever. You could be playing on, the craziest of asphalt courts that are just ripping out your shoes, but this traction is built to last. And then they'll be happy because basically we saved that brand or retailer from selling them a shoe that wouldn't fit their use case, right? But we have helped point them in direction of a shoe that does. And when you have happy customers, they keep coming back to your brand over and over again because they've come to depend on you, right? But at first, it's you don't want them to have that bad experience, whatever the case may be, whether it's based on the materials or people have different pet peeves about shoes. Like, I heard someone say that we all have a foot brain, right? And so not everyone has trained their foot brain to know exactly what they want. So they kind of need like a foot Sherpa to show them, hey, if you play outdoors, if you do this, or if you do this, this shoe's good for you. If not, go with one of these other shoes. Right now, certain shoes are so popular, everyone has to have them, right? Like sneakers is super hot as a collectible item. So there's not only the marketing messages from the brands, there's this cool factor that, is running through, high school, college, wherever that person's social circle is. And so a lot of times it's a tough pill to swallow that like this shoe won't work for me. But the good thing is like when those kids or whoever says, well, I'm buying this anyway, because this is the cool shoe. And then it doesn't work for them. They're like, oh, WearTesters was right. This didn't work for me. I'm now going to trust WearTesters in the future. So if we stick to that, we'll point everything out to you so you can make a good decision, even if they go against us, and then figure out, oh, they were right. That's actually a good thing for us in terms of developing a long-term reader, long-term relationship with that person.
Drew knew how he could be useful through his reviews. He didn't want to write polarizing reviews because everyone's feet are different, and what works for some won't work for others. He didn't want to write love or hate reviews, just truthful, honest ones.
Yeah, so we try and just dig in depth in the shoe. We try and not, like you could do one of those like super negative reviews where you just flame a shoe and you'd get a momentary bump. Maybe it goes a little bit viral, that sort of thing. But it's not really helpful to the people that are actually looking at that shoe because they like the way it looks or they like the previous model and, this is the next year version. So what we try and do is just dig in depth on any of them, go into materials, cushion, traction, fit, support. Those are our core 5. But we also go into pros and cons. Hey, this is a pro, this is a con, and we just list them out. And in the end, we kind of have faith in our readers and watchers to make their own decision. But how I start with a shoe is trying to forget everything about that brand in the past, everything about that particular model. Like when we're talking running shoes, the Nike Pegasus just came out with the 39th model this year, right? So there's a lot of history there that could influence me. So I wipe my mind clean of everything before, take it out on a run, and then I try and put it through the paces in the several different situations. So kind of a short run, a little bit of a longer run, a little bit of a faster run, these they're just working into my normal workout routine, but I want to get also a certain amount of miles to see how they break in. Do any problems develop? It's those sort of things that then get synthesized into the review. But what I'm trying to do is encapsulate just my thoughts for each run, or each workout and, kind of keep those separate so I can see how my opinion of the shoe evolved through, the 20 to 50 miles I wore it.
Can you think of any examples where maybe what WearTesters said disagreed with the mass consensus, or was there any kind of conversation around, like I say, you've got to have this back and forth with your audience so that they believe you, because if you always agree with them, then you're not adding any value to the conversation. So can you think of any examples of times where maybe there's been a discussion or maybe even an argument over a certain type of shoe?
Oh yeah, I mean it happens all the time. So the aforementioned Pegasus 39 just this year, I didn't like it at all. But now, we do a good job of letting people know the style of our testers or the size of our testers. I'm 6'6", almost 200 pounds. And so someone that is a smaller runner would like the Pegasus 39. And we mentioned that stuff in our reviews as well. Because just because I don't like it doesn't mean you won't. Here's what exactly I didn't like about it. And some people will read those things they didn't like and they'll be like, well, none of that stuff matters to me, so I'm still going to pull the trigger and buy this thing.
Drew, at this point, I think we have to ask the obvious and the simple question. How many pairs of shoes have you guys got? And how many pairs do you think you've tried over the years?
So I've got this wall of shoes behind me, which you guys can see because we're on video.
We have to mention that, folks. If you're listening to the audio and not watching the video, Drew behind him right now, I can see at least 40, 50 pairs, and that's just behind him.
Yeah, there's I think on the wall there's 72 or 84. I can't remember the exact number. Wow. But then I got a closet of shoes back here. So I'm typically somewhere between 100 and 150 pairs at a time. Because I'll keep generally all the last year models in case I want to reference them when the new one comes out next year. But there are some, like I've got a pile in front of my desk over here that I need to go through and either, sell on Facebook Marketplace or take to Goodwill. So I'm kind of behind in that, but it does force you to make hard decisions because you've got shoes always coming in. So I'm always thinking, okay, will I wear this or do I need it for a future review, right? And so sometimes I actually give one away to a friend or something, and then a year later I'm like, oh, I wish I would have kept that so I could take a picture of this with that and put it on Instagram, but so occasionally you'll make the wrong decision on whether to keep something, but it's just too much product basically to keep.
Because of Drew's authenticity in his approach to shoe reviews, he has a dedicated following that trust him and know they can always believe a review when he releases one.
Nowadays, you can make a career in any niche. When Chris and I were growing up, no one would have said you could make a career reviewing shoes, right? Like that just wasn't an option. It just so happened that we grew up at the right time with the internet and YouTube popping off like they did. But nowadays, you really have to niche down first because it's hard to stand out on YouTube. It's hard to get a website. You're dealing with a lot of opportunist and fake competition, whether it be on the web or YouTube, people that are just there because there's dollars there. And, to stand out versus that, you have to niche down to what you're super passionate about and then let your personality and passion show. So if you're on YouTube, you've really got to love what you're talking about because it'll show and you'll attract other people who would be your friends in real life if you went to school with them or, lived near them or whatever. And those become, kind of your A+ advocates in terms of, telling people about you and sharing your stuff on social media. But you've got to start with that niche. I tell people you got to be ready for a long grind where this is going to be a side thing. You may get lucky and it pops early, which that would be great, but that's why you need to niche down to something you're super, super passionate about because it has to feel like a breath of fresh air from your day job where you go and you work this in the evenings and you're just spending time on your hobby really and sharing your hobby with other people. And that's that authenticity is what people latch onto. And then you become someone they want to follow, not necessarily as like an influencer, but as someone that's providing them great information, someone that's, almost like a friend.
Both Eric and Drew could have easily built careers off of trending topics in their respective niches. However, they likely wouldn't have formed the same level of trust with their audience along the way if they had. Being reliable and trustworthy beats being trendy. In order to build a long-term community, you have to do more than just follow trends. I'm Si.
I'm Jen.
And this is Creative Independence, a podcast by Memberful. Thank you so much to Eric Olander and Drew Whitcomb for joining us today. You can find Eric at ChinaGlobalSouth.com. You can find Drew at WearTesters.com. That's WEAR testers.com. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Be sure to leave us a review and we'll catch you next time.